That's right. Talking about the mind and then going into mind tricks, into Jedi mind tricks, I guess, right?
Now, for any of you who has not yet seen this and would like to see this movie, then
feel free to just mute the
totally
stream.
Mute the stream, fast forward in the podcast. Go ahead and do that, because we will be talking about some spoilers here. So I just want to make sure that we're getting that out there now.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Okay.
Wait, what's that noise you make? It's like nails. Okay. So The Last Jedi is the second film in the newest Star Wars trilogy to have come out. In just 2 weeks, it became the highest grossing movie in 2017 because it's Star Wars.
So,
and it's December. Did it come out in December?
Yeah, that's what they've been doing is December
season.
releases, yeah.
So, I mean, it's not super surprising, right? It earned mostly positive reviews when it opened.
And from the critics and everything, like websites, individual critics, you name it, were giving it raving reviews. Well, to the point. I mean, they said it was a really good, strong movie.
And, but since then, there's been this huge backlash against the film, right? Like, fans were not actually thrilled. And to the point where there's been petitions created to remove it from canon.
Yeah, so you know those petitions that people ask you to sign because a city isn't recycling, they feel they should, or a business is trying to do something shady. Yeah, people are creating petitions to make it so that way this Star Wars film, The Last Jedi, is not officially considered part of the canon of the Star Wars galaxy. Which is like, that's pretty extreme. I'm going to say, out of all the petition power that you have when it comes to politics and your environment and everything else, and this is what you're going to petition for? I mean, yeah, okay.
I mean, it's Luke Skywalker. I mean, come on, right? But yeah, so a lot of them were disappointed in what was happening with Luke's character. A lot of them thought it was like 20 minutes too long. It was a time-wasting trip. They didn't think it was developed very well. They're like, this is just a bridge between 1 and 3. Well, duh. It's part 2 of a trilogy. It's sort of like, it's at some points, like some of their issues, I'm kind of like, that's like saying you went into one of those ice restaurants and you were like, it's cold. Yeah, it's an ice restaurant. What? And, you know, basically a lot of people were upset because they didn't get quite the same feeling that they got from the first 3 Star Wars movies. And they're not getting
the OG 3, not the 3 that never happened in like the late 90s, early 2000s with...
Right, the 1970s.
Classics. Those ones we're talking about.
Right. And, you know, unfortunately, right, a lot of people seem to have had this emotional attachment, and I'm one of them, right? I mean, I didn't watch it in 1977 because I wasn't born yet, but I did watch it a little later than that. And I did have an emotional attachment to the story and everything, but because people had this emotional attachment and these expectations of what these new films should be like, they didn't really give the film a fair chance, right? Because it's hard to, when you have expectations, when you think that in your brain this is how it's going to go, and then you watch it, it becomes less about, to them, about, well, can we look at the film from a film perspective? Like, if you didn't know anything about Star Wars, you didn't know anything about, you hadn't watched it 30 years ago, you're not dressed in your cosplay and you're watching it, right? Is this a good film? Can you review this semi-objectively? And I don't think a lot of these people potentially did, right? But it's important to go into watching a film with a somewhat of a blank slate, especially if you're there to then review it, right? And it's fine to obviously have your opinions. We're not saying don't have opinions. But if you're going in and you're trying to give an honest
you want to give
review,
a fair review, yeah.
You can't just be, oh, well, I thought it was this, so it wasn't, so it sucked, right? Like, well, look at it from what you're actually seeing it. And to our point earlier, you know, don't be in the past. Don't be don't be in the past. Be in the present, here and now. What do you think about it?
Well, and you also have to think about timeline too. I mean, for instance, this new trilogy is in the future. It's not like it's supposed to be basically right a butt to the original 3 films. Like, this is like basically what happens right after everything in the original 3rd film. Like, that's not what's supposed to happen. There's supposed to be a lot of time and a lot of changes that have happened, while also trying to show little nods to the past original 3 films, because they're trying to show that in a way history does repeat itself in a certain funny, odd sense, that there is always things that happen and then happen again. Cyclical
kind of history.
Yeah, and so, I think the big point to think about is the fact that, it's not like they are butt up against one another. So you have to also keep in mind that, yes, this is the way I felt about this story, and this story happened on this part of the timeline, but we're way down here on this other part of the timeline. So much time has passed, so many actions have taken place in this world, in this universe, that we have to keep a far more open mind. Because again, I can understand being frustrated that a film did not give me the feeling it should have if it took place right after the ones that I'm comparing it to.
Right. But this was like 20 or 25 years after that classic OG. In terms of the chronology.
Right. Of the story of the universe, yeah.
So, was this fairly reviewed by the fans? I mean, Luke goes through some heavy shit. had been going through some heavy shit. We saw him when he was like down there in the shit, being like, I'm in the shit, right? And so, but yeah, it's like 20, 30 years later. Like, people change. Things happen to people in real life that makes them different, or makes them question certain things, or makes them feel like that, right? Like, it's I have to say, I mean, out of the first one, spoiler alert here, so please mute yourself, but in the first one
of this trilogy,
in the crap, what is it called? Oh my god, The Force Awakens. had a moment there. I was about to Google it. In The Force Awakens, I was like, what, Leia and Han aren't together? Like, that was my first big shocker. I was like, huh?
Well, they were together is the thing. They weren't at that point because they were doing their own.
No, but they're broken up.
Right. But it's not the fact that they were never together.
No, I know. But, like, yeah. I was expecting them to, like, live happily ever after. Mm-hmm. Unless one was killed by someone else. That was it. Like, forever together, hearts, butterflies, rainbows, perfect life, right?
Because life happens.
But life happens. And that was that was actually, when I was watching that film, I was like, wow, life. Like, it was, I liked it, right? Like, it was a shock for sure. And I was like, no, but in the books, they have twins, right? Like, what? And then, of course, Han, sad tear. But then in this one, right, like, I was like, okay, fine. I don't have any expectations. I'm here for the ride. Let's go.
Well, yeah, and we have to keep in mind, too, to kind of talk about the critiquing process, because we don't want to forget that before really getting into the meat of our own kind of reviews and thoughts of the film. There are really 3 core questions that you should be asking yourself when you're critiquing something in order to really critique it fairly. So, for instance, what was the artist trying to achieve? What was that point? They initiated this story for a reason. What was the point behind it? The why factor, as I like to call it. From there, did he or she, as an artist, so in this case, let's say the director, did they achieve it? Did they achieve what their goal was? And then thirdly, was it worth doing? So in this case, was The Last Jedi worth doing in order to have this story continue on as it is? At least worth doing in the sense of the way they did it, right? I mean, we definitely need the second one to connect to the third one. You just can't skip 2 and just go to 3. That just doesn't work. But overall, though, the way they did it to tell the story, can we see the connection to the first one of this trilogy? Can we still see some signs of the past from the original 3 films? And that's really how we should be looking at it, rather than like, oh, well, this isn't the Luke Skywalker I remember. This isn't the Han Solo I remember. Well, this isn't the ending that I wanted for these characters. Yeah, well, I mean, in a way, you are not the director. You are not the actors. Again, the directors, the actors, everyone works together to tell this story. And so they brought in their own perspectives from years of experience, and we have to trust in that. We're not the ones getting hired to make these films. And I'm not saying that they're always in the right, but what I'm saying is that, again, based on this type of thinking to start off on a critique, it is really important to look at, well, what did they do? What did they want out of this? And did they achieve it? Does that make this a good film then? If they achieved all three, then yes, it makes it a good film. Now, we can agree or disagree to whether, do we feel it's appropriate for the overall timeline based on many other external factors, such as the three previous films,
all the books,
and everything else, then yeah, you can kind of argue certain things. But overall, based on where the film needs to go and grow, is it getting to that point of growing and going in a direction forward rather than backward?
I think too, people are also potentially, for me, I'm watching the films and the Skywalkers and the Solos and the Leias and, you know, the Hans, they're not the main characters.
Not anymore. I mean, they're there as the framework because they are from the past. You know, they're there to help frame what we're seeing on the canvas now, basically.
Right, but I think because they're in there in the film, I think that's another reason why people are so attached to, like, well, this is how it used to be. Because in the other trilogy that came out, you know, we were before their time, so they weren't even there at all. So there was nothing kind of sort of, you know, there was nothing else to compare, like, oh, it's Luke in this trilogy and Luke in this trilogy, right? But like now we can. There is that comparison you can do. But it's like, but they're not the main characters anymore. And you know, to your point, like, you know, oh, that's not the Luke I remember. Think about yourself 20, 30 years ago, if you can go back that far. You know, are you the same person you were then? Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Are you the same person you were last year this time?
Are you still a sperm trying to get into the ovary? I mean, depending on your age. No, right? You've changed. Just a little bit, hopefully.
Yeah, and so, you know, to think that Luke is still the same idealistic, sort of gung-ho, eager, wide-eyed, pretty boy, I mean,
he's aged.
No.
He's gone through life, right? And unfortunately, what's happened to him, his experiences have run him ragged and fearful in many respects. And I think that's fair to do. And yeah, I think in many respects, people were hoping that, yes, Luke is back in here. He's going to jump into his X-Wing, fly around. Then he's going to grab his lightsaber and kick some ass. And it's like, well, yeah, that really doesn't happen, right? He just walks around an island a lot and talks about his life and what kind of happened to create the current story. But we'd also be frustrated if they didn't start talking about the current story, right? Because then we'd be like, well, who are all these new characters? Why should we give a damn? What's really the point of this besides, you know, being more like masturbatory to the original three films rather than where we're at now?
Right. And can I get into our review at all? Or
Yes. So now at this point, now that we've kind of set up the fact that, again, kind of coming in with a blank slate is really important, because also if a film sucks, at least you're not disappointed too. You know, you're like, hey, I came with a blank slate. It's unfortunate, but I didn't have high hopes for it anyway. So it works both ways, right? I mean, we're not just saying, you know, in order to not be negative about something. No, but it could also help you not overhype something originally, then come into it and go, well, that friggin' sucked.
Well, to just quickly touch on the fact that, right, at the end of the Return of the Jedi, right, Luke went through some heavy shit, man. He lost his arm.
Or his hand.
His hand. Yeah, it's like part of...
It was his hand.
Oh, it was just the hand? Oh, I thought it was like a whole... I'm misremembering already. But, you know, and he found out about his dad. Like, he found out all this shit, right? Like, that's traumatic. And for him to then, you know, go back to being idealistic little Luke, like, that's not realistic. That doesn't happen to people, right? Or it takes many years of therapy and being okay with yourself to get there, right? So it makes sense that he probably wasn't that, you know, he was probably jaded a little bit to begin with, even when he started all of his training and all the other Jedis. And then, you know, to see that he was also human and, you know, had some potential lapses in thinking, right? That he admitted himself, and like, you know, when he was telling his story about, you know, hovering over Ben in the tent and stuff like that, like, he's a human being, right? And I thought that was really well portrayed. And I love, actually, I think that the film did give a nod to the audience in the form of Rey, because Rey was like, oh, but you're Luke Skywalker, oh my god, this is the Millennium Falcon. Like, she was all about the lore, the myth, right? Because they probably grew up listening to these heroes like we do now, right? We read the history books and we're like, oh yeah, so and so, oh my god, this and that. They were probably just some human person who did human things, and then somebody wrote, you know, magical things about it. And so when she approaches him and she's like, oh my god, but you're like Luke, you can't just abandon us, what's going on? I think she kind of, you know, they kind of made her have a little bit of what they thought the audience reaction was going to be.
Yeah.
You know, and they did sort of answer that. Like, Luke wasn't, you know, he eventually kind of got to why he's been sort of the way he's been and where he's coming from. So you got it. Like, I got it. You know, and I think by the end of this particular film, what happens to him also kind of makes sense, right? So I thought it was amazing. I thought it was a great film. And I don't think that they were the main characters. I don't think the original three were the main characters. I thought Poe was a main character, Rey, Finn. And I can definitely see, in terms of execution from beginning to end, all those characters started at one point, and they wound up at a different point by the end of the film.
Oh yeah, well, and it's their job also to try to introduce even more new characters. So they introduced Benicio del Toro's character a bit. They introduced, I think her name was Rose, was it? Rose, yeah, who was kind of sort of becoming googly-eyed over Mr. Finn. And so it's like, you know, they don't want to overshadow the things they need to move toward. And I think that's really important. And again, this film was supposed to be, in these films overall, are really supposed to be kind of the sunset years of the Skywalker line. And it's supposed to become less of their story, because honestly too, all these people who were in the original films, they can't keep doing this too. I mean, we got to think about it from an actor perspective, right? There's going to be a point in time, like, they're not going to be able to do what you're hoping for them to do back when they were doing it in the 70s and 80s, right? And so it's important to realize this, and that they have to progress the storyline. They can't just roll, you know, Mark Hamill out in a wheelchair with an IV attached to him. Hopefully he doesn't end up like that, but you know what I mean? Like, to the point where you're so old, but people are like, but people want this. People want you. Come on, Mark. Like, no, they need to progress the story, and they need to get new faces into said story as well. Because if you love the story and you love the universe, this is how we get it to flourish. This is how we get it to grow once again, and have it be a part of the really one of the staples of kind of our cinematic history here. Right? You know, and people try to hold on to this so much. Well, then, you know, sometimes, as they say, if you love something, you got to kind of let it go and let it do its thing, right? You need to let it move forward and progress. And if it comes back, then great. But you can't always expect it to stay the same. And I think that's one of the big factors. And personally, I enjoyed the film. Will I say it's one of my favorite films of all time? No. Will I say that it was life-changing for me? No. Do I think it was a solid second film? Yeah, I think it was a solid second film. Again, I had no major expectations. I wasn't basing it off the original, even though I absolutely loved the original, grew up on it, watched it a billion times on VHS. I literally saw the cartoon series of R2-D2 and C-3PO, which is out there. I watched the cartoon series of the Ewoks. I watched the Ewok film, which most people don't realize actually exists. It has Drew Barrymore. Check it out. I watched that a billion times. So it's not like I don't know Star Wars and I'm not a fan of it. But I was just like, you know what? I'm tired of being disappointed from hype, whether it's from video games or from film. I do want to just go in here and just experience it. I'm going to sit, I'm going to watch it. I'm not going to think about The Force Awakens, because when I when I saw Force Awakens, I loved it. I was like, oh yeah, this is awesome. I loved the nods to the original series, the character development and introductions. The story overall was just very engaging to me. I really had fun with it, and it was the first time I felt the way in a way to the original, but I also felt that it was new enough and that were enough new introductions to things that I went, but it's not the same. And I think, at least luckily, I caught myself on that and was like, okay, this is not the same though. This is great, this is exciting, but let's see where it goes. And so with this second film, I thought they did a good job of introducing certain people. I think some things felt a little rushed, and I think they could have developed certain aspects of character development a little more. For instance, I do have to agree that there was 20 minutes where they were in this space casino and they were trying to get the hacker or whatever, and they had to introduce Benicio del Toro's character, and so they had to, make sure to get that in there in order to show that, hey, there are other people out in this universe and everyone gets impacted, and it doesn't matter, what part of the hierarchy you're in. You can have a ton of power and do a really good acts, even as a small innocent bystander, if you will. And I get that, and that's heartwarming. But yeah, I personally thought that could have been all cut and the film would have been fine. Do I like the little moments in there individually? Yes. On the whole, in a film, I could have done without. And I think they could have then invested that time into a little bit more character development on like Rose, to go, why the hell should we care, besides the fact she just randomly comes in and catches Flynn trying to escape and then gets caught up in a whirlwind of, oh shit, we need to stop the Imperial forces here. To, I don't know, just overall like relationships, and like, because for instance, I didn't feel emotionally invested into Kylo Ren. I could care less about him. In the first one, I actually felt a little bit more for him. And especially when he's such a new character and in some ways really a core antagonist, as he outlasts certain people. I feel like I should have felt more emotional investment into it. I didn't. And it's like, by the third film, why should I feel it then? I should already feel it now. And I just didn't. For whatever reason, I just didn't. And I also really didn't feel invested in Rey. I felt she was asking a lot of questions and comments that the audience would, and reacting the way the audience would have reacted. But in a way, I just needed more, right? And I just felt there could have been more with her in a way. And I know too, again, they're trying to do a lot in a movie, right? They're trying to close out a certain storyline. They're trying to open up new storylines. They're doing a lot, and I appreciate and respect the hell out of all of that from every single aspect. So don't get me wrong. We're in the media and film industry, so we've done films ourselves and we understand all that. But really it's the point of then, well, where do you invest that money into, or that time into? And I think there could have been more in the development to help us not only give a damn about new characters, but continue to give a damn about the current characters that are supposed to be the ones carrying the torch for Star Wars from now until infinity, or whatever, infinity and beyond, as Buzz Lightyear would say. I think that was really important and kind of missed in a way. But I do feel like overall, like, the storytelling was still solid. Again, I think my big thing was the 20 minutes in the space casino that could have been cut, or at least cut shorter. But like, okay, we need to come here. There's some corrupt motherfuckers. They're benefiting on both sides. Oh shoot, we got busted, and then move on. But it did feel like it dragged, and it felt like it was own kind of little miniature movie, if you will, or small movie. And so it's like, just section that out, put it out as an additional release or something. But it could have gone without that. Now, without saying that though, I thought some of the small little twists were nice. I didn't think they were huge surprises. Like, I figured Snoke would be snuffed out, if you will.
Snoked out.
And, I figured that would all happen, and it was just when at that point. So I thought that all of the clues out there, they weren't that convoluted, which I guess is a good thing. But at the same time, I also want to feel some surprise. And I didn't feel a whole lot of surprise, except for that time factor of just when. It's not if, it's when. And I kind of figured by who, you know what I mean? And again, that could also just be that I've done a lot of directing. I've done film script writing and play script writing. I've done acting. So I've been on the other side where I had to evaluate and analyze a story in a very specific manner and always be aware of that. So again, there is kind of that bias, I guess, on my side. So again, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. I did like the acting. I thought it was solid. I liked the humor of Mark Hamill as Luke. I thought he had a little bit more humor that he brought to the table. It felt more like him. You know, like this is Mark Hamill in real life, which was actually kind of nice in a way, right? Especially as his character is going off into the sunset. You know, why not go out in a way that is him? And I think that was cool. But I also thought that some of the points where they utilized his humor didn't fit. I felt like, again, what humor and drama is supposed to do is balance each other out. You work up the drama until the tension is so high, and then we need an emotional release or a catharsis, so then you bring in a little bit of humor to ease it up. And I felt there were points in the film where it just hadn't reached that point of tension yet that it needed to in order to implement that said comedy. And so what they did was that they would reach it, they'd get close to reaching it, but they're not quite there. Comedic moment dropped, and then they tried to pick it right back up and bring up the tension again. And it to me, when I'm trying to experience this and you know, really feel it, it just felt kind of broken up a little bit more. It didn't carry me through because there was just certain abrupt changes that kept me from reaching that point, if that makes sense. And again, I know that's not everyone, but at least just from my personal standpoint, that's what I felt. So I thought it was a solid movie. I thought it was a good movie, especially a good second movie in a trilogy. I thought it bridged things potentially nicely. I mean, we have to see the third one to really know for sure, right?
Yeah.
We don't really truly know where this story is going to go until we get the third one, which will be in December. So, but I don't know. I mean, are there some points that you agree with, some points that you may disagree with, or anything within that?
Yeah, I don't. At first, I thought the casino scene was like trying to be all what they wanted Tatooine to show a long time ago. Just kind of like, oh, there's this whole other world happening as well, going about its own way and everything like that. I didn't really understand the Benicio del Toro's character. Like I get it, but I don't get it. Like, maybe he's showing up in the third one. I don't know. Also, there was like all this hype about Phantasma and how like she was gonna have a bigger role, and I'm like,
no.
I saw her eye. That's nice.
She was in one scene that lasted maybe 10, 15 minutes maybe total.
Maybe, and I was just like, I just don't get it.
Because she was supposed to have this grand return, right? Like in the first one, she gets basically, knocked down, if you will, in a sense, by Finn. Finn gets the upper hand on her, and they escape. And that's supposed to be like her going, "Oh, I'll get you and your
I'll get you, my pretty,
and your little dog too, or your little Chewy too." And then what happens is she comes back for like 15 minutes, is like, "Haha, I got you, Finn," and then, "No, I don't. Never mind." Oh, so that was disappointing.
Weird. Yeah, and I didn't understand why there was so much hype, and then when she was there, it was like, okay.
Because that's also a big deal. That's a big deal having a female stormtrooper, having her lead them. And plus, they didn't really develop her that well in the first film, in The Force Awakens. So I was expecting more of a backstory. Maybe she was going to be a much larger antagonist then, because they built her up that way. I mean, is she going to come back in the third film? Well, by the end of the second, it doesn't look like it. But hell, they've done crazy things in cinema before. So maybe they bring her back and she is the head antagonist, because she's like, I failed the first time. I really failed the second time. I will prevail the third time.
And she's like best friends with Benicio
del Toro.
His character.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe there's an option there. There's an opportunity there, but I don't know. It was just like little things like that too, where it's like, okay, you've kind of told a story, and then you decide just to crumble it up and throw it off to the side.
Yeah. And then, like, I really liked the character of Rose and sort of that commentary on, it's not always just like the big heroes that do things, but also it's the little people. And I loved actually how, so there's this like kind of obviously multiple storylines happening at the same time, but there's two plans in motion that sort of kind of, you know, had one not happened, would the other one have succeeded? Had the other one not happened, had the other one succeeded? Like, that's really cool too, to kind of see the interplay of like sort of Downtown Abbey kind of feel, where you've got just so many things in motion and they all intersect, and it's not just this perfect story of like, well, these people went on a quest, great, nothing else happened to them, fantastic, they succeeded, right? It's like, no, real life gets in the way and shit happens and things don't go according to plan. And I liked that was really cool. And then, like I said, just I like the emotional journeys of all the main characters. I think, to me, one of the reasons to answer sort of a question in chat, you know, why maybe Kylo Ren didn't feel like a main character, it's because he didn't feel like anything happened to him from the beginning to end. He pretty much, to me, as far as I'm concerned, stayed stagnant in his emotional development. Like, you know, he was part of some of the twists that Evin was talking about, but it didn't feel like he really truly changed his philosophy or his view of life. He just got more entrenched in it, which I guess that could be a change, right? You went from being on it to being like, yeah, definitely on it. But you know, in terms of Poe and Rey and Finn, I definitely saw a clear change in, you know, Finn was all like, it's just me. By the end of it, it wasn't just him anymore.
Right.
And you know, it wasn't overnight, right? Like, it didn't all happen at once. It maybe won't stick around, right? But like, you definitely saw that shift over a period of time. Same thing with Rey, you know, she was sort of like kept looking to external forces telling her who she was, and then realizing when she had the chance to, that it was internal forces, you know, like she was the answer she was looking for. And that was really cool to see. At first I didn't get it. I was like watching that scene like, what the fuck is happening here? This is a mind fuck right now. And then afterwards realizing, oh, she found her own power. And that was cool. And that it didn't, you know, even when she kind of tried, she at one point actually found the answer she was looking for as well, which may or may not be true at this point. I'm not really sure, because these two films have been sort of like fucking with our expectations in some fashion. So to be determined. But you know, she got an answer, and realized again that it didn't make her who she was. She's already making herself who she was. That was really cool. And then for Poe, you know, to kind of again go from this like Han Solo kind of character to more of a, okay, I'm gonna be a leader. I'm not just gonna be this like explosive bomb that just heads into action. I'm gonna I understand a little bit more about that. To be a leader, it takes a little bit of a different skill set and a different way of looking at things, and that there's multiple things happening and all this other stuff. And that was cool to see too.
Oh yeah, they really try to push the moral sense of, it's not about what you sacrifice yourself for, but what you're willing to protect. The thing that it's more important to protect the things you love rather than just try to like heroically, there we go, sacrifice yourself for a potential end, whatever that end may be that you want. And that it's not always about that. You know, we saw bits of that in the original series, and I think there is value to those moments in a way and power to them. But I think it's important that they also brought out that kind of moral belief into this, that it's also about protecting life, not just destroying it or destroying it to save it, that you can protect all life and go through a way without sacrificing certain elements of it. And the only thing that I had an issue with the most out of this, especially now that we're talking about it here, is the fact that I felt there were just too many moral points that they were trying to make, and it really muddied the waters. It went from like, you can be anyone in the hierarchy and still do great things, to, oh, there's still hope out there because excuse me, you know, there's other people that can come in and be involved and take power. And at the same time, though, you know, being a hero doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It just means saving the ones you love, and you can take other routes. And, you know, there was just so much going on from a moral perspective, all these different messages that are bombarding you, that I think that's also what caught them up, because they wanted to put in these moments, but, oh, this would be really good, and, oh, we have to develop this end for this moral point. But then by doing so, we took away time to develop certain characters, or we just added more time without really needing it. It was needed to, in order to get the point across of that moral point, but it doesn't mean that was needed for the overall film. And I think those were my hang-ups on it.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. And yeah, it is hard when you're introducing a lot of characters too, because then it's I think some of those scenes were also crafted to showcase those new characters. Like,
right.
Here is Rose. Here is her sister. And like, there were moments where it worked. There were moments where it was like overdrawn out. But hey, sometimes you need to be slow and methodical in how you deliver information so that it actually hits home. So there's that too. I personally would have loved to see the Star Wars universe and all of this stuff as a TV show, like Game of Thrones style, because there's so much there, and obviously they've decided to ignore a lot of the books, a lot of those stories, which is unfortunate because there were some damn good stories in there, and I'm not entirely sure why they decided to do that, but I think they needed, it's like they needed more time. They needed like another film for some of these characters.
Yeah.
But it's like, it didn't need to be at the same time, it was it was like too long in certain parts. But I think if some of these stories were explored a little bit differently, in different films, it might have worked better. I mean, the original, the OG, the vanilla Star Wars, as it were. I mean, how many main characters did it have? Basically, the three of them.
Well, it was, Han, Leia, Luke, and then basically to help support was like 3PO, R2-D2, Chewbacca, though they had their kind of main moments, but they were really more supporting. It was, like you said, like really about like that core three. Obi-Wan came in and out, Yoda came in and out, Darth Vader being kind of a core antagonist with the support of the Emperor. But yeah, absolutely. You had strong supporting characters, but otherwise it was really like the core three because they were all so intertwined, two of them being related.
But they were also together for some of it, right? In a way that I don't think that the main characters in this trilogy are. Like,
right.
They're very much like, okay, now we're in Finn's chapter. Okay, now we're in Rey's chapter. Okay, now we're in... Which, again, is what Game of Thrones did in the books. And so it lends itself very well for a TV show. And so I think if they just turn this into like our TV shows on HBO,
it would just all come together.
Yeah, we would have had more time to spend more time with the characters, get to know them better. Because I do think they introduced a lot of really cool characters, but at the same time, it kind of was, why are they here? I don't understand. And then the other characters like Phantasma, which I was looking forward to seeing more of her, I was like, oh, what? Okay. And when like the first half of the movie too, I was like, where the fuck is she?
Yeah, and at least they brought her in at a point that I was not expecting, so that was a nice little surprise. Like, oh, hey, it's Phantasma. Talking about Game of Thrones, it's what's the character's name? Bree from Game of Thrones. Is that
Brienne.
Or Brienne, yeah. So I mean, talking about Game of Thrones, you already had someone from it, right? But I don't know. I think overall, I mean, again, because what we're trying to talk about is not just our review of the Last Jedi. But what we're talking about is reviews overall, because as we had mentioned previously, there were people who saw it and literally created a petition to say, hey, The Last Jedi should not be considered part of canon. We didn't like it. We didn't like where Luke went with it, with the characterization. We didn't like where the story went overall, and therefore this was horrible. And what we've discussed is the fact that whenever you try to review anything, you have to really try to go with a blank slate, again, understanding, well, what was the artist trying to achieve? Did he or she achieve it? And was it worth doing? And I think from our consensus is based on that framework that, yes, they did achieve it. They achieved their goal of moving forward. They achieved the goal of telling a story, of bringing certain characters to life. And whether or not they could have worked more on certain aspects is another factor. But I think overall, the direction they took it made sense to a point, and that it was there. I think they introduced too much, and I think they were trying to tell too much of a story. But in the end, I think, was this movie worth it? I'd say so. I enjoyed watching it. Would I watch it again? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I think more of myself leans toward probably, yeah. If I had the opportunity, sure. Why not? Would I have watched the first one, The Force Awakens, first one in this trilogy? Again, yeah, absolutely. But we'll see. Again, this is a second film out of the 3. And that's the factor, the point with these bridge films, or these part 2 of a trilogy, is the fact that most people have issues with these types of films because they are trying to connect an overarching story. You try to make it as interesting as possible with the smaller stories that start and wrap up within this film. But overall, they've just got so much to try to introduce and connect to the third film. So we just really have to see how good of a, at least, second film in a trilogy this is then, based on the third one when it comes out.
And I loved it because I thought it was really well executed. I really enjoyed it, even as a standalone film. I didn't go into it having sat there and sort of tried to remember The Force Awakens. So I had actually forgotten some things from the other film that I was reminded of when I started watching the second one. And I really thought the acting was on point. I thought it was really good, even for the characters that I didn't care about, like Kylo Ren. I just didn't care about him because he was so good at making me not care about him, if that makes sense. And
also they didn't give him much of a stage to perform on.
Right, yeah. He kind of had a little bit of just, stand there and look angry.
Look brooding or pouty, I mean, that was...
Yeah.
Because he was supposed to be a kind of a beaten dog character.
Right.
And I think they were really trying to build up this moment where all of a sudden the dog bites the hand that feeds him, in the sense of Snoke. But again, because they didn't give him enough screen time to develop further, I was like, yeah, okay, I could see that happening. And I moved on. I was like, okay, well, what's the next thing? I wasn't caught in the moment of that like I should have been. Like, I think they were trying to get people to go, oh, wait, what just happened? I was just like, yeah, okay, I saw that was going to come eventually. What's next?
Yeah, and that, to your point, that sometimes it is hard, even for me, to watch films or read stories or watch TV or and kind of be surprised by some things because, right, we write stories, we direct, we act. There's a lot of that kind of work that we're involved in, where it's sort of like being in the Matrix a little bit, where I can sort of see where things are going, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, they did this, okay, that means we're going in this direction. Oh, they did that, okay, this direction. And then when it happens, it's sort of like oh, cool, that's where I got. So I definitely get that. For me, it doesn't always make me enjoy it less, depending on how it's executed.
Fair, yeah.
There's definitely movies where I get holy shit, I can't believe that, oh my god, and then I talk about it on hours on end. And then there's other movies where I wasn't sure what was going to happen in some scenes, but I had a 90% idea, and then it would happen and it'd be like, all right, cool, but they did it in to me, they did it in a good way enough for me where I was like, this is cool. And I love that universe. I could watch that all day, every day. Even the bad stuff. even the bad stuff. Even if people went out into my yard right now and cosplay and try to do it, I would watch it.